Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, February 8th, 2022, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me, as always, is my co-host and my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How you doing, Trev?
I'd be doing better if Cox's internet didn't suck suddenly for the last couple weeks. Been dealing with that. For those that enjoy our That Nerdy Site show podcast, I basically had to cancel that last minute on Sunday. So thankfully Cameron and Frank were able to kind of fill in. But as a result, we didn't have a video version because that's all managed through my system. And I just haven't been able, had very unreliable internet service. So knock on wood, it survives, this podcast. But yeah, it's been frustrating the last couple weeks, especially because it also impacts work. So
yeah, I can only imagine, as someone who works from home as well, the frustrations of what that would kind of entail.
Yeah.
We luckily though are not here to talk about frustrating things, but really fun and exciting things tonight, I think. We kind of have this episode dedicated to the Spawnies that happened last week, I think, or I guess 8 days ago, from when we record this.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start really broad and kind of go more narrow from there. Trevor, what were your kind of initial thoughts when you first heard that the Spawnies were happening, and then watching the show itself and kind of seeing what it looked like for its hour-long duration?
Yeah, so just I guess peek behind the curtain. The Spawnies effectively were being broadcast while we were recording last week's episode, because we recorded a couple days early last week. And so that's why we're catching up now here a week plus later. So I don't think I've ever met Khee, but I've really appreciated the work he's been doing in the space for a number of years. And Riana Manuel is a friend. I've hung out with her at a number of kind of funny themed events or What's Good Games events and stuff like that, or PAXs and stuff. Especially, PAX West. She was routinely in the scene because at the time she lived in the Seattle area. And so when they announced a couple months back, I think now, that they were going to be doing this and putting this on, that was exciting and really cool. I kind of did a little bit of digging and at the time, and it was Khee has kind of done this through the Spawn on Me stuff for a few years now, but this was taking it to a new level and making it more of a actual kind of awards show showcase, as opposed to the giant bombcast style version that it had been in the past, or the kind of stuff we do for our game of the year awards or stuff like that. So this was kind of him leveling up to a degree, and I thought that was really cool and really exciting. And kind of seeing him kind of talk about it on Twitter and stuff, about really trying to focus on representation and getting not only kind of representation in terms of his kind of, I don't think he has a panel of jurors yet behind the Spawnies. This was, I think, largely him and Riana kind of came together and said, these are the games we played last year, and kind of came up with the nominees and winners and stuff. But in particular, it was reaching out when presenting those awards, or when getting those awards. It was reaching out to people of color and underrepresented people in the community on the presenting side, as well as on the award acceptance side. A lot of the recipients, while it might have gone to a game as a whole or something like that, he kind of made an effort to reach out and say, hey, if you have kind of marginalized people or people of color or underrepresented people who can accept this award on your company's behalf, that would be great, and we would love to kind of shine a spotlight on that. So yeah, just I think really, really cool, especially obviously I don't think it's any surprise or shock still that the industry is still very predominantly white male kind of culture. So Khee really taking the bull by the horns and saying I'm going to do this for me and for kind of the voices I want to see in the space. I thought was a really cool step. So I was very happy to support it. And basically, as soon as we got off the call last week, I hopped on and like checked out the VOD of the YouTube upload. And yeah, really enjoyed kind of what he put together. Really good production value in terms of like the graphical quality and a lot of the ideas behind it. And I look forward to seeing kind of how it continues to grow and evolve in the years to come.
I think for me, you echo a lot of my sentiments. One thing I immediately wanted to shout out that I was blown away by was the production behind it. I think was so well done, right? From the like opening like sizzle reel kind of thing of showcasing all the games. Literally, like my very first impression was like, holy shit, this looks like it could be like at like an actual like, you know, E3 PSX conference. It's like edited so well together, like the cuts are blending like really seamlessly together. And so I thought that was really, really nice. And then the way that it cut between the various presenters, like you said, including the first one we see being Andy Cortez from Kind of Funny, who obviously we each know and love very much, was such a nice touch. And yeah, like I think throughout the kind of show, I was really, really impressed by what they were able to do, right? Like this is not a show that has like a huge behind the scenes production crew helping out, right? Like it is largely just him and like a few of the people who might have helped out kind of thing. And so like I thought it was super cool to see the level of polish on it and see how well put together it was. And then we get into the kind of the larger themes that you were discussing there of both what it does in terms of representation and like the video game community and like industry and showcasing voices who aren't usually get to be heard or seen, talking about games and celebrating them, but also in terms of, I think, it being such a cool showcase for games. And I guess I mean that in the way of, I like the Game Awards, right? Like I think the Game Awards are a fun time. The Game Awards are also very cheesy at times, right? They sort of lean into that in moments, right? Like, but I don't necessarily know if I'd call the video game like awards cool, right? Like they're kind of a cheesy, fun celebration of this thing we all love, right? And like as someone who loves like the BAFTA awards or DICE, those are really great celebration of games that are a bit more kind of like either highbrow or kind of focus on like a different side of the gaming industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was cool to see a celebration of games that did just feel so cool, right? And so like in the moment and hip and like culturally relevant and like very much targeted, I feel like, at like my demographic and my age group, which appeals to me as someone in my demographic and age group, obviously, right? And so I think seeing that kind of celebration of games too was like a ton of fun, right? And it's silly and goofy, but in a way that appeals much more to me than I think Jeff Keighley's humor does. And Jeff Keighley is a generation older than me, right? Like he's making a different kind of show. And I like the idea that like all of these can kind of coexist together, and you can have like the Game Awards and the BAFTAs and DICE and the Spawnies, hopefully in the future, kind of all each tapping into a different element of like the gaming community and kind of game award shows.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go so far to say like the Game Awards at this point are almost more marketing than awards.
Like, yeah, I mean, that's a great
especially
point too, yeah.
in the breakdown of like the time that is allotted to each of those things. Like that was a thing that that Khee was really kind of interested in really supporting, was giving developers the time to like accept their awards versus like the most recent Game Awards where it was like I think like 5 of them got to give thank you speeches or something like that, and a lot of them were just Jeff standing there and saying like, here are the nominees, reading and the winner winners. Is blah, and then just moving on to the next package of world That's premieres really and stuff like that. Yeah. And kind of as a companion to this, one of the things that I'll be including in the show notes for this episode is Andrea Renee over with What's Good Games sat down and did a Twitter Spaces conversation with Kahlief Adams Saturday, this past Saturday, kind of talking about the Game Awards, talking about kind of his intent behind it and a lot of stuff. And that was one of the things he really highlighted was he basically, when he reached out to the company saying, hey, we want to present you with this award, do you have somebody who can kind of speak and do the acceptance speech? Like he basically was like, you have 2 minutes. If you don't want to use the 2 minutes, that's fine, but we're giving you 2 minutes of time. And I thought that was just a really cool thing. It very much harkens to me like a Game Awards like equivalent, I guess, to like when Kind of Funny started doing the Kind of Funny game showcase of kind of, let's do an E3 showcase or something like that, or originally it was like a PSX kind of showcase, but for smaller indie titles. It was like, we want to give developers the time and put the spotlight on them, and I think that is something that is largely missing in the modern iteration of the Game Awards.
Yeah, I think that is a really astute point and a really good observation on kind of the evolution of the Game Awards, and how in some ways it is sort of just becoming a winter E3, right? Like it has just sort of taken that and, like you kind of said, over time gradually kind of pushing the Game Awards aspect of it further and further off air and kind of off stage. And so I think something that can celebrate games and be this great celebration of it, right, is exciting to me, right? Like that's the thing. Like I like award shows, right? And I know that's like a weird take in some quarters, and maybe a very like dated take and like traditionalist take. I don't know, like, but like I like the Oscars and I like the BAFTAs, film and games, and I like the Tony Awards and all the kind of various award shows across multiple medias, because I just like celebrating things, right? And like at the end of the day, like they're just celebrating things that we love, right? And they allow for conversations around like whether or not you think this thing should have been nominated instead of this thing, or this person should have gotten the award or that, or like they allow for, I think, really free-flowing conversations around things that we love and celebrating the things that we love. And like ultimately, that's what I'm here for. That's what I enjoy. And so I think the evolution of the Game Awards has been kind of frustrated in that regard. And so one more place that is kind of saying, hey, we can do something like that from a different angle, I find really engaging. And I think, to see it from someone who isn't Jeff Keighley is exciting, if only because Jeff Keighley's great. Like he's like a grandfather of the game, like a critic industry at this point in time. But you also kind of know what you're going to get from a Jeff Keighley show in like good and bad ways. And so to see it from someone who is much newer in that sense, and who can provide something different and who can kind of shake up, I think, the formula makes it really exciting, in the same way that like the Kind of Funny showcase, right? Like those showcases, I think, are a different kind of show than like a regular E3 conference is, and they allow for, I think, the humor and personality of Kind of Funny to kind of bleed in. This kind of all segues, I think, really nicely into the next big point I want to talk about, which is, what do you want next and kind of see going forward in terms of the evolution of Spawnies? And this obviously is going to touch on the conversation he had with Andrew Renee, but in terms of what you would want to see the Spawnies kind of look like next year, the year after that, and kind of going forward.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that jumped out at me as I was watching the original iteration was kind of just a broad understanding of, okay, how were these games decided on, and what was like the decision process,
criteria,
and finding out that it was largely, since, I mean, Spawn on Me is Kahlief, basically, like that is his show, and it was really just kind of the things he wanted to give awards to, as well as Riana kind of as his co-host. One of the things that came up in that conversation with Andrew Renee, Paris Lilly, routine foil and friend to Kahlief Adams, hopped into the call and basically asked kind of if, in the future, there were plans to kind of make more of a panel of judges or a jury kind of selection committee, so that this idea of bias gets removed out of the equation, and still have that panel be people of color, underrepresented people in the gaming space, in the gaming community, but make it so it is more voices heard, so it's not just limited to these are the games that a couple people played, giving kind of a wider opportunity for voices to kind of weigh in and kind of have their say. And that's definitely something that Kahlief, I think, expressed an interest in, and as kind of like growing in the future and kind of trying to figure out how to approach that next year and whatnot. I think again, like from a production standpoint, like the graphical design was like already just spot on, and they did a great job with it. And I love the, like, even if I don't get, you know, the direct references that he's making in how he has renamed his awards, because a lot of the awards are your standard kind of game show awards, you know, best shooter, best adventure game and stuff like that, but instead of best shooter, he's calling it 6 Million Ways to Die award, or best narrative was the Snot Bubble Cry award. And hearing like that, like Snot Bubble Cry, like I don't need a cultural reference to like get that is like, you know, making a thing, but he talks about in his interview with Andrew, he talks about how that was like referencing a very specific meme in the culture kind of thing of a couple of black men, like, you know, weeping with one another and kind of like it was a direct reference to a thing. Or his you know, his best sports game award being the Willis Reed You Big Dummy award. I'm like, I have no idea who Willis Reed is, but it is an aspect of the culture that he's trying to kind of celebrate and highlight there. And I love that. You know, even just on a small scale, like adding a little bit of flavor to these awards while still getting across the idea of like, this is what this award is supporting and highlighting. Like I didn't need to be like so ingrained in the culture that I get, you know, the direct references, in the same way that like I miss so many of the things that are coming across as, you know, as TikTok things these days or something, like people are making those kinds of references and I don't get it, but like I get enough context clues to get what's going on, get what's being said. So I think like already like he's on point there. I think he's gonna look into adding a few more awards, because it was, I want to say it's like, you know, 10-11 awards I think total. So I think there's kind of room for growth there. The fact that the show is a little over an hour, and that's like including 2 5-minute like ad breaks that he kind of put in there. I thought he did a great job in terms of the musical performances that he brought in particular. The Mega Ran performance is like a huge standout. Just Mega Ran already is great and has been great for many years, and shout out to him because he's another Phoenix boy. But in particular, him doing the alphabet aerobics, kind of like that iconic like rap, but doing it with video game references for the last year of video games. It was just like Mega Ran at the top of his game. I loved finding out after the fact, since I was watching the VOD, that like when Kahlief was like running the show, because they had it all pre-produced, and so there's basically just presenting it live on Twitch, and they had like front page coverage on Twitch and everything, so they had like a lot of great eyes on it. But the auto roll ad tried to play over the Mega Ran performance, and Kahlief basically was like, no, that's not gonna happen, and he rewound the tape to go back and get the full performance for everybody that was watching live on Twitch. I appreciate that he was like, no, this is definitely a highlight of the show. We're not going to let that be hidden behind ads or something like that. So shout out to that. And yeah, I'm excited to see, now that he's got this first one under his belt, how he takes the lessons he's learned from it and has the thing grow. Especially realizing, I think now, as he did, some of the timeline things he's going to have to kind of tweak or adjust or account for, especially in terms of he highlighted putting out the call to developers and saying, hey, we want to give this award, can you give us a thank you speech back that we can kind of insert in. He was doing that while everybody was out for their holiday vacations, basically. And so it was trying to figure out like, I mean, he talks about like herding cats and wrangling cats, as you have to do in so many of those situations. So I think, either just now that he's got one under his belt and kind of has a little bit of learned experience, or if he can get like other resources to help support him
Mm-hmm.
and kind of help manage some of that stuff, in the coming year, I think that'll really help. But I mean, yeah, just in term, like, he already did a great job of bringing in like a lot of voices in the community. Like, I love seeing so many friends in the community, in the
Yeah.
space, as like presenters out there. You mentioned Andy, but like Belinda was out there, Yusef from
Mm-hmm.
Ubisoft,
Mm-hmm.
Blessing also from Kind of Funny. Like, so many great presenters, as kind of marginalized people in the space, getting, a moment in the spotlight, to highlight and celebrate these games that we love, that aren't gonna I mean, like, especially the idea, like, a lot of these people weren't invited to the Game Awards in the like very exclusive, like, COVID
COVID
era
bubble.
Game
Yeah.
Awards that we had, this last year. So getting to see them, have a little bit of a spotlight here, I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I couldn't have said any of that better than you, but I will do my best. Like, I think, yeah, I was kind of taking notes as you were talking because I didn't want to forget anything. Going to like the criteria first, that's, I think, is an easy thing to kind of work on and build on over the years, especially as kind of after this first one. I think you will have, like you said, a lot of eyes on it now that people might want to volunteer to kind of help be a part of like a panel of judges, kind of helping to select games. I would love to see a panel of judges that no other Game Awards show can kind of match in terms of its representation of the diversity of the video game industry,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that is something that's super exciting to me. Of like, what does this, panel look like a year or two from now in terms of the breadth of figures with deep video game industry experience, kind of selecting the best games that no one else is talking about in a lot of ways, or games that people maybe didn't click for them, and kind of shouting them out. I find super engaging, right? So that's something that I personally am really excited about, is to see this kind of like people of color panel, that potentially we could get in a couple years. Outside of that, the awards themselves, you touched on something that I was going to say near the end, but I loved the names of all the awards. I think it's such a smart, clever thing to do. I think it helps both make the Spawnies so unique and kind of give them their own flavor. I think it fits totally in line with like the culture of what he has helped create over these past few years in terms of like his shows, and that audience and community. And then I think it is just really funny. Like, that is one of the biggest things for me, is that this whole show is very funny. And I think they have such a good sense of humor that lands way more often than not. And that's really refreshing to see from really any award show, but especially ones based in the video game industry, where they kind of usually veer to the extremes of take themselves very seriously, or we're going very cheesy. And so it was kind of nice to have one just like strike a really good balance in terms of its sense of humor, and the awards names kind of fed into that. Megaran is Megaran. We could literally do a whole podcast at one point in time just like talk about Megaran. Maybe we'll one day, because it's worth it. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And yeah, it just, I could do. He's a freak, so talented. And then in terms of kind of the last big thing I want to talk about is like the big thing I personally want to kind of discuss in terms of what we would want next, which is him looking to kind of expand that team and support system around him, right? To make it easier to reach out to those developers earlier, or later, but just reach out to them when they're actually in the office a bit more, right? And have that kind of team around him. So it's not just him trying to like corral 100 different cats, like you said, right? Like, I think of, essentially he's in the spare bedroom phase of all this right now, right? As a kind of funny reference. And so I think of the stories Greg has of, Twitch not working and him getting frustrated and slamming things around and it just being awful. And, where Kind of Funny is now, right? Like 6-7 years later. Yeah, 6-7 years later, God. And versus like, where the Spawnies are now, right? And seeing him kind of build that team around him that can be a source of comfort and, support and help and aid when he needs it. A shoulder to cry on when you need that too. I find super, super exciting to see who he does kind of help bring in that tent. I imagine a few favorites will kind of be brought in as a kind of recurring figures. And so that's something that I find super engaging because I think that will also feed into a larger growth of this kind of award show as well by bringing those different personalities that can kind of engage and banter with one another. And so that's the biggest thing for me in terms of what I want to see next is how does it grow in the cast of characters around the Spawnies, right? Like such a big part of like Giant Bomb's Game of the Year awards are the people, right? And I think the Spawnies is sort of interesting because it is pulling both from classic award shows like the Game Awards and obviously like the Oscars and all that kind of stuff, while also blending in a mixture of stuff like Giant Bomb and, that's obviously where this show's own roots lie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in that blending of the two, allows for it to really navigate a really fun and interesting avenue. And I think one that plays really well to the personality of the group behind Spawnies.
Yeah, I think
so that's
just on that note in particular, one of the things I was thinking about that was basically a perfect segue for was one of the elements of this Game Awards that you don't get with DICE or the Game Awards or others was the podcast-esque side of it. Of they announce the winner and then Kahlief and Riana kind of have a little conversation about what they loved about that game in that particular category and why it rose to the top. And to some degree, like I'd already heard a lot of kind of Rihanna's thoughts on a episode of the What's Good Games podcast where she kind of did like a Game of the Year conversation with them a little bit. So like there were a lot of elements like I am well aware of her love of Apex Legends and Psychonauts 2 and Knockout City. So like a lot of the winners that end up kind of like bubbling to the surface and a lot of what she's talking about don't come as a surprise to me because I know that how involved she was in this and I kind of already know her thoughts, and I imagine if I was a more regular listener of Kahlief stuff and Spawn on Me, I'd have the same thoughts of him. Like I would know what he loves based on what he's talking about throughout the show. So like it's a cool little like here's a best of wrap up of what they kind of thought. But yeah, I think as the thing grows, having that be other people kind of jumping into that conversation, and it's not the two of them giving, because there were a couple times where I think like Loop Hero was one where Kahlief really loved Loop Hero. Riana hadn't played it, so like she didn't have a ton to really add to like his thoughts on it and why it jumped out and won like his the Indie Apocalypse award for best indie. But I so like getting to hear again more voices in terms of kind of that aspect of the show, the podcast version of it that is much kind of has those roots in the Giant Bomb cast and those kinds of elements. I think will be another great kind of like evolution of it in years to come. And maybe even as a almost like I don't want it to lose that like friends talking about why this game was great. Obviously like we did a whole 4.5-hour podcast on those kinds of things on our side of things. So like, but even that, I think, having that be almost a little bit more like going into those winners and kind of having like these are the bullet points I want to highlight and talk about, like this is why this game won this category. I think if you have that over 5-10 different people, it can be okay. A presenter kind of says and the nominees are, and then the people who are really excited to talk about that game come back and are presenting, this is the game that's the winner and here's why. And it just might have a wider pool of kind of voices on the show in the future. But again, that's like I don't pull anything away from it just being Kahlief and Riana this time, because it was kind of a like, let's figure out how to make this thing work. And again, I thought they did a great job with it. And that was an element that I was like, oh, it's cool. Not only did we get, a significant thank you from the developer or from like somebody representing the team behind the game, but then having kind of a conversation around, this is why this game won. And this is why this is something, if you didn't already know about this game, this is why you should check it out.
Here's why you should check it out.
Was a cool thing that, we don't like, we never get that at the Game Awards. It's or DICE or anything. It's never like, okay, this game won, and now Jeff Keighley's coming back and talking about why It Takes Two was a great game for co-op or something like, or why it was a great family game for.
I know. I'd love to have heard his explanation of that one. Yeah, I totally agree with all that. Yeah, I mean, really, in terms of my final kind of thoughts on it, I loved it, right? Right. And again, to quote George Cruz, I'm a mark for these kind of shows anyway. Right? Like I love award shows, as I've already expressed. But this one in particular was such an easy watch, I think I will say, right? Like it wasn't one where I was checking the clock. I like the fact that it was a pretty tight hour, right? Like it was just going at a pretty good pace constantly, even with like the like ads and like the musical intermissions, all this kind of stuff. Like it just went along really well. And
Kahlief's Pictionary, like 5-minute blocks.
Yeah, and so like I would love to see them experiment with an hour to hour and a half long award show, right? And kind of vibe in there, right? Like I hope they do keep the podcast elements, because I think that is something that is really strong about it and really unique in an award show set in any medium. Like kind of talking about why this thing mattered to the people and why they loved it so much. And so I hope those elements carry forward. I think it's a great first year of it, though. I think it's a great start. I think I'm excited to see the eyes and attention both from critics, fans, and also kind of the developer and publisher side of things that are on it now, kind of for year 2 going forward. And I'm excited to see what Kahlief has in store for the people around him that are going to be helping out for the next year, for what kind of presentation he wants to do for the next year, what the musical guests look like, right? Like, it is sort of crazy to think this is the foundation and like the most basic this is ever going to look, I think is a testament to what they were able to achieve over an hour this past week at the Spawnies. And so I really enjoyed it. I think it's one of my favorite award shows that I've seen in a hot second. I'm very excited to see what they do next. Trevor, any final thoughts on your end?
I was just going to ask, is it so obviously, one of the things we talked about is like, some more awards next year round. Is there anything, and we don't need to kind of figure out what he's going to try and call it or anything like that, but are there any particular awards that you felt were missing, or, a like, here's what you would love to see added as an award next year?
Ooh. That's a great question. It'll never happen. But like I think of like some classic ones we had at like Input, like that I think are pretty great, right? Like the David Cage like Messiest Award, right? Like some variation of that, like just like that kind of stuff, like the T Award. Like those could be funny. I think that he could kind of have fun. And like I'm sure there'd be more like
I definitely. I mean, like if he opens it up to like the industry as a wider, not only let's celebrate the games, but let's also celebrate the culture of the games industry. I could absolutely see the best, the hottest T Award being best news story of the year or best reporting of the year. Or something like
the
that.
year. Like I think that'd be a ton of fun. And I think that he and Riana, if she's still there, would have like could really have some fun with those kind of things. And then I don't know, like I think it'd be kind of cool. Like, I think it'd be kind of cool to do a celebration of like either game characters or narratives or stories around either like black storylines and characters or just like people of color storylines in general. But obviously the problem with that is that you need to have enough for a nomination category.
Yeah.
But like I think like highlighting some of those could be like a really cool category thing. That
was a little bit where I immediately thought of it was I would love to see a best performance kind of category or equivalent, because they did have a best narrative and that one ended up going to Psychonauts 2. And so get it, like I think one of the staples that I thought was missing kind of their kind of inclusion was like, let's celebrate one of the best performances of the year, or some of the best performances of the year, whether that's a best actor and best actress, I don't know, but that's definitely something I think would be cool to see, especially if there are like a good pool of potential nominees. Be cool to shine a spotlight on this. And I think especially for this last year, I thought there probably was a really good pool. Like you could have, the performers behind Deathloop, both Colt and Juliana, I think. I will forever sing the praises of Alex from Life is Strange True Colors. I thought was a great performance. So I think that was a not necessarily a missed opportunity, but it's something I would love to see included in a future Spawnies.
Totally fair. Everyone go check out the Spawnies. We'll have all kinds of links to it in the show notes and in the Twitter thread as well. And Trevor's shoutouts, I will also shout out as well in terms of Andrew Renee's conversation afterwards and a Twitter Spaces, I think it was. That will also be included in the show notes as well.
First Twitter Spaces I ever listened to.
Yeah, there you go. So I encourage everyone to go check that out and get into Twitter Spaces. Otherwise, that is the show today here on February 8th. If you like what you heard, you can go over to the podcast service of your choice, like and subscribe, rate and review us on iTunes, give us the 5 stars, tell us what you liked about us, leave a little review, and it'll mean the world to us. Make us all very happy. You can also go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite and like and subscribe to the channel there. Hit the little bell notification to be notified when the latest video goes live, which is pretty much daily over at youtube.com/thatnerdysite with all the kinds of Let's Plays, podcasts, and reviews that we're going over there. Then you can also finally go to the site itself, That Nerdy Site, the hub of the channel collective that is That Nerdy Site, and go find all the latest podcast reviews, features, game of the year content, all bundled up over there. Otherwise, of the wrap up, I'm pretty happy. You can go find Trevor Starkey at Trevor J Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to plug or shout out?
It wasn't even close to the first otherwise of the wrap up. You had like 3 others before that. So we skipped over shout out, like other shout outs. And I did want to highlight a couple that I had. One, I want to shout out Jessica Howard over at GameSpot now, a friend of the site. Final Fantasy VII is a timeless tale of hope, growth, and love. Wonderful piece that she wrote about kind of growing up and how her relationship with Final Fantasy VII has changed over the years, from first playing it on her mom's lap as a 4-year-old up through now she's an expecting mother, and kind of the different evolution and the different like eras of her life and how she's connected to that game over the years. It was a great piece. Shout out to Jessica and all the great work she does over there. And then I have a second one in here that I want to shout out. This is from thegamer.com by Hoon Chan. One of the conversations recently kind of making the rounds, of course. Not only is Sifu dealing with the difficulty conversation, but it's also dealing with representation and appropriation. And he wrote a piece called Sifu's Brawler is a Soulless Caricature
Yep.
And then subtitle there is on racism, appropriation, and our fixation with game mechanics. So shout out to that piece as well. I think is an interesting breakdown from an Asian writer talking about kind of the representation in the game, and I think it sparked that the conversation that if it's handled well, people are going to be a lot less critical about it, a la something like Ghost of Tsushima, compared to I think there's been a lot of kind of there wasn't a ton of thought put into some of those elements here with Sifu. So yeah,
absolutely great shoutouts across the board. I will echo that, and those will be in the show notes as well. Yeah, great shout out to Trevor. You can go find myself at LeftyLoggy, LoggyLoggy on the internet. I will echo those shoutouts. Also, go encourage everyone to go listen to Frank and Cam have a 2-man show on That Nerdy Site podcast, talking about some Dying Light 2. Spoiler alert, I've listened to a lot of Cam's thoughts about Dying Light 2 now, both from this podcast and his Let's Play, Let's Play that he's had posted over there, which I encourage everyone to go check out as well. It is... I will preface, if you've played a Dying Light game before, absolutely maddening to watch Cam play the game a little bit, but always a joy to see Cameron do things. Yeah, what an experience. So I encourage everyone to go check that out, and then I will also always shout out that D Plus show as well as that Bond show as well. Lots of good stuff happening all across That Nerdy Site collective here. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at that nerdy site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other.